Because I personally work with the DoD, and I found it really hit home a couple of times. So
what about it? What about it hit home? Curious.
changing requirements throughout a program, and no really real established exit criteria or timeline.
Understand that. I did a project for DLI Washington, Defense Language Institute Washington in DC. That was interesting. Although the colonel, lieutenant colonel at the time, he was very appreciative because he said, so it reads from left to right. I got, yeah, why wouldn't it? And evidently he's seen some less than optimal things go on with data centers. But yeah, he was thrilled. And I told him, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And he was bracing himself. We were doing a data transfer. And I said, okay, it's done. He goes like, what? It's already? I go, yeah, it's done. So he was pretty happy with the contract.
Good.
Yeah, so they can go well, and it's usually surprises them. My sister works for the Air Force, and she used to work at DISA, Defense Intelligence, something. And she used to do projects for the military all over the world. And I get to hear her complain about the military side quite a bit. Who else? Anybody got a favorite project management movie? I'll bring out my cats again.
Money Pit.
Money Pit. Okay, why is Money Pit one of your favorite movies for project management?
Well, my thought here is it kind of shows what happens when you don't have everything kind of planned out. And when you don't have a plan, you didn't really kind of look to figure out what needs to be done, no real budget. And so you're just doing everything on the fly. So it's like kind of the what not to do.
Understood. Absolutely. So how much time should be spent in planning in the entire project? If you have a project that runs 12 months, how much time should be spent in planning? It's not a trick question.
Oh yeah. If it's 12 months, I'd say 3 months of it should be planning.
I like it. Yes. So the military, when they're allowed to, they said 30% of the total project time should be spent in planning. How much time do you spend how much time do you think is spent in planning in very large organizations such as, I don't know, Citibank? That's who I'm going to be talking about tonight.
Probably like a good 33%, 40%.
How about 2?
Geez.
How about none? Or not enough, generally speaking, at least from their perspective. We had, and I'll get into it a little bit deeper. A lot of times the project is done on the fly, or they're dictated to, especially in the consent order world, which again, we'll be getting into tonight. There you go.
Some new faces. No, Henry, you just joined up with us too. So thank you for joining and being a new member as well. And then I'm seeing Gary, who's also just joined our chapter also. So we actually had about 130 people that signed up tonight. Kind of what we were seeing last year on trends is maybe about 60 of that, signing up the night of. But either way, it's going to be a great attendance and great presentation. And so.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Yes,
So
thank you.
Curious for our new members too. How did y'all hear about us? Or what made y'all decide to join?
Gary, you want to go first, or?
Sure. I actually just relocated down here for work with Entergy, and been down here about 3 weeks. So needed to actually get involved in a chapter down here instead of where I'm from. So I came down from St. Louis area. So really looking forward to learning more about the chapter and getting more involved.
Right. So I know I saw you signed up for the in-persons too. So those I think are going to be great opportunities. And just kind of for visibility at the beginning, this year, kind of going into it, we're planning our strategies planning session this weekend, but we're still planning on hosting the virtuals every month and going to be trying to bring back more in-person opportunities as well as kind of a new initiative that our VP of membership is spearheading. And that's going to be volunteer givebacks. That's going to be held once a quarter. And it's going to be a community initiative where a smaller group can meet and kind of do hands-on work together to give back to the community. So.
So Travis said he's buying Cajun food for everyone. Oh, wait a minute, that's not what you said. Okay.
Yeah, Travis, I haven't seen you in a while. We need to go get booty in from Nunu soon. So that needs to be a plan.
So Henry,
That definitely sounds like a plan, Tanya.
Yeah,
That's
so
one thing, like living here now, I don't do it as much as I used to.
good. Go ahead, Henry.
oh, okay. I'm originally from New Orleans. I'm currently living on the Gulf Coast, but I got my PMP back in, I guess it was October, and
Good deal.
it looked like a good group to join. I worked for Northrop Grumman, if any of y'all are familiar with defense.
Very
So,
much.
yeah.
Yeah.
And not much more to say about that, but
So what are you working on? Not specifically, of course. In case you're working on any secret squirrel stuff.
maybe sorta. I mostly work with the Navy. So
Ships, planes.
ships.
Yeah.
Ship.
They are deconstructing my carrier in Corpus Christi right now, if they're not finished already, the Kitty Hawk.
Oh, really?
Very sad, yeah.
But kind of moved. I started off in the composites industry in DoD and
Okay.
moved into Northrop Grumman. So I've been working there for about a year, and it's been pretty good so far.
Good times.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm actually a past member, board member of the chapter, and living in New Orleans. Our chapter, and I'm past president of the New Orleans chapter, but the chapter in New Orleans is kind of quiesced. So in order to get my fix, I had to join the Baton Rouge chapter.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm hopeful. I mean, on a PMI national level, we've been hearing some rumblings about that, but from what I have heard, there are some people that are interested in reviving that. So hopefully we will see that effort happen, because I know having
Well, I'm involved in that, and
Okay.
it's going very slow. So
Well, if I can do anything to be kind of a champion and a motivator, or even if y'all get back up running, locally to where y'all have, the geographical meetings covered, we'd be glad to partner and do anything that we can to, like I said, just kind of help champion and motivate. Because as you know, if you've served on the board, it's really just keeping the boots on the ground. And whether that's in person or virtual, it's the behind the scenes that keeps things flowing. So
Indeed.
we'll keep connected, and anything I can do to support
Thanks.
or help, just let us know. So. All right, so we've got probably about 5 to 10 minutes before we get Jerry officially started. And I'm so grateful to have Jerry here. For those of y'all that don't know, he's the president of the Dallas PMI chapter. We're both in Region 6 together, so we have the opportunity to kind of collaborate on the president's level and share synergy. We started talking about this last year, and I'm thrilled that he's here and actually speaking on his project spirit, his day-to-day project experience for all of us, and also helping to kind of get the conversation started with things.
That's because I'm shy and quiet,
Yes, totally.
obviously.
Bring the cats into the mix again for the people who have not seen the 21-pound cat.
They're probably back in the back of the house right now. They decided to bail.
Okay, I
I
got
bothered them a bit too much.
you. They're a little bit actually more shy than you are on camera, right?
Yeah. Well, they don't like to be bothered. It's nap time.
So,
21-pound cats give a good cuddle factor. You can just hang on to a nice chunk
Yeah.
of cat.
Well, see, they were kind of halfway feral. They're rescues, so they were rescued with something like 30 cats, and they would only let them go as a pair. So I took them both, and they're very strongly bonded. I got irritated with one of them, and the other one came smacking me in the calf. So I said, okay. They protect each other, but they've gotten more affectionate. I've had them for 3 years now. They sleep with me these days. First, it was like, nah, we don't want anything to do with you. But they're good. They're good boys. And they'll end up on the top of the cabinets in the kitchen quite often. So I take pictures of them there. And
I have a bonded pair rescue too, and we had adopted both of them. So
yeah,
they're special.
they outgrew the cat tree I had from 'em. I had to put a piece of connecting plywood between the two posts because they wouldn't fit on it anymore. They're big.
I saw a comment in here from Russell, who's with the Washington DC chapter. He's the VP of programs. So one of the things when I sent out the email earlier was for people to share just their goals. And y'all can do that throughout the program too, just so that way if somebody sees it and they have similar goals, on earning PDUs, they can be your accountability partner. But I love this. Russell saying that one of his goals is to host the 10-minute dinner meetings for the Washington DC chapter. I think that's great. And I think getting things back in person too, as well as keeping the virtual, is important. One of the big lessons I've learned these past couple of years is just having that mix of both kind of helps to satisfy a lot of the different elements, helps people that can't attend in person to get their PDUs. But then for people that are able to be back in person, that energy and that level of brainstorming and collaboration is just awesome. So wish you luck in that.
4 months ago. Outstanding. Yeah, probably one of the best things as far as PMI goes. It's the networking with people who have the same level of experience, have less experience, and the opportunity to mentor people who have quite a bit less experience and help them come up to speed. Because one of my monikers in my email is wisdom not shared is wisdom wasted, because if you don't pass it on, then there's possibility of it being lost. And then what have you accomplished really? Dory, she's an achiever.
She's been engaging with us a lot. So one thing too, and this is just kind of this is really worth mentioning from a membership perspective, but one of the things that we have access to as a board, if people are current chapter members, we can actually see, the amount of PDUs that you've earned when you're up for renewal. So it's kind of like a partnership where we can help you with that. Like I was thinking about it, and even just things after COVID, like remembering to pay your insurance, set all your doctor's appointments, get that inspection sticker on the car and get your registration, kind of applies the same to your PMP. I've talked to a lot of people that because of the ruckus the past couple of years, they didn't realize that the PMP had lapsed or that they were behind the curveball on self-reporting. So just know that we have that. If you ever need to check, y'all can always check on your own dashboard too. But if you ever run into like, I need ideas and I need ways to help figure out how I earn these PDUs so I don't have to take that test again, we've got you on that. So
I don't intend on ever taking that test again. I have a good friend of mine. His name is Tony Johnson, and he's responsible for, I'll go ahead and say, the bulk of the PMPs that are trained in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that have been trained in Dallas-Fort Worth. He's responsible for, I would say, at least half or most of them. He's got more certs than anybody really would care to list. I made fun of him at the last dinner meeting we had for him because he spoke at our December dinner meeting, and he's got every single PMI certification. He's got all the agile certifications. He's got other he's written something like 60 books, most of them to do with project management, whether it's agile, discipline agile, or getting people ready for their PMP. And I told him once, I'm never going to take that test again. He says, you shouldn't. Right now, he's trying to go through the iteration of trying to figure out the best way to train for the new PMI methodology, because they're very much not as focused on the processes, but on the communication and how you get things done, not just the steps, but how to navigate in an organization. So that I'm participating a little bit of that peripherally, and it's an interesting process that he has.
That's good to know too. Like one of the things I've been thinking about, because people will come to us for advice on how do we study for the PMP, and I took it back in 2014. So one thing that I'm trying to do and working a little bit better at, Tori, you'll be included in this one too, but there's several people that have recently passed it. So maybe just getting, people to email me or share in our LinkedIn group, just best practices, because everybody's study tactics are going to be slightly different from another person's, but the more that we share, especially in that LinkedIn group, like that's my way that I can think best on how to communicate, because if people join it, it's visible, and I want to encourage more people to showcase their voices in there. And that may have some good advice on studying for the current version of the PMP and would be helpful. So.
Also, Tanya, there's a fantastic subreddit that's dedicated to studying for the PMP. And I leveraged that heavily when I was studying for my own PMP.
Okay. Is that something that could be shared in the group too? Because on that group too, like I'll have people a lot of times, they're like, I don't know, can I post? I'm like, absolutely. This is our group. This is not a group for just the leaders to do a one-way communication with job postings or anything like that. It's for the group collectively to communicate. And I mean, obviously best practices. I mean, if there's anything, like if anybody gets abusive or, that's one thing that would be handled. But I think for the most part, people have a pretty good understanding on what kind of valuable information to share and how to help one another out. So,
Tanya, this is Kim. I missed with the beginning of what she said, and I have a coworker that just reached out to me this week, studying, but wants to start studying for the PMP. So I didn't hear exactly what she said, what she had.
There's a fantastic subreddit.
Okay.
That, and I'll post the link in our LinkedIn. I think that's what you were referring to, right?
Right.
Tanya,
Yes.
posting
Yes.
in it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I leveraged that when I took the PMP back in 2018, and I leveraged that because you all go through those moments of panic, right? When you go, oh my gosh, I'm taking this exam and there's so many unknowns, and it gets really stressful and it creates a lot of doubt within you. I see a lot of smiling faces because we've all been through that doubt. And so I went to Reddit and found this subreddit, and you have to get past some of the folks that say, I only studied for the PMP in 3 days and I passed it with flying colors. And you know that that's a blatant lie, because I don't know anybody who could do that, right? But once you get past that, people give some really great advice on how they studied. And I applied that, a lot of their advice, to my studying, and it helped me through it.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that information. And yeah, I don't recommend the way I did it. I took my contact hours from the Houston chapter, actually drove in like 6 or 8 weeks during that one summer. And we took that's how we did our contact hours, our 35 hours. And I waited, about a year and a half later, decided to take the PMP. And then I get the flu. I take a week off of work to study, get the flu so bad, I am head down till Thursday, have to call the testing and say, I can't make it tomorrow. And they're like, well, you can drive to New Orleans on Monday, but we don't have an opening. And I passed, but I got to tell you, that weekend was not fun. I don't recommend it.
well, it looks like we're right about 5:46, and so far I show about 68% of participants. So we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. So for those of you just joining us, this is Jerry Glasscock. He's current president of the PMI Dallas chapter. I almost said Baton Rouge. I'm trying to give you my role. Delegating.
Maybe on vacation.
Yeah. So he also works for Citibank. And so his presentation tonight is going to be on projects in highly regulated industries.
in highly regulated and global industries. So let me go ahead and see if I can actually work technology. There we go. Now share. Let me share my screen. Now, last time I did this, I shared the wrong screen and they saw my notes on the side. So I'm going to try not to do that this time. Actually, I think I just did that now that I talk about it. So share. Where's screen 2? There we go. I may have to do it this way. Apologies for the technology difficulties. There we go.
This is where having 2 monitors is critical.
I have 2 monitors, and I'm sure.
You have to see your own notes. I
Yeah.
learned that lesson, unfortunately, the other week.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It doesn't show me the screen with the zoom on it. Yeah, I think it might be this one. There we go. All right. So you probably don't need to see this. And here we go. Apologies for that. So topic tonight is project management, highly regulated global environments. As was stated, I currently am on contract with Citibank. They're about ready to convert me again. I did work with Citibank 4 years ago, which is the source of this keynote. It was an anti-money laundering program. It was in every region of the world, and I learned an incredible amount. It's also, my claim to fame is that this is my first $1 billion program over the course of 4 years. So getting into the agenda, I do an introduction a little bit more about myself. We'll get into what money laundering is and how it's monitored, the regulatory environment in which you find yourself.
Question, are we
Yes.
supposed to be seeing the Zoom screen or something different?
You should be seeing my background screen. It's not showing.
Right now I'm seeing, and let's see, it
let's
looks like it's showing the Zoom.
All right, well, then I may have run into this. What do you see now?
I see project management in highly regulated and global environments.
There we go.
Success.
There we
Viola.
go.
Okay.
They're cooking with hot grease now.
All right. Somebody promised gumbo. All right. So
Okay.
getting into the regulatory environment, and specifically Citibank and anti-money laundering, we'll go over the problem statement, the environment I found myself in and the challenges therein, the governance that is around it, and the solution. And then I have some bonus material that I threw in there just for fun. A little bit about myself is I've got a few certifications, PMP, ACAMS. For those of you who don't know what ACAMS is, it is the Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialist, CSM, CSPO. My career is more or less evenly distributed between the 20th and 21st centuries. I spent some time in the United States Navy as an aviation electronics technician. I worked crew boats in the Gulf of Mexico in the oil fields. I've been an iron worker, a garbage man in college, a barista. Then I got into the network infrastructure, system administration, and network administration. After I finished college, I got into the professional services side of things, business management, software development, and so on. My career developed and took on bigger and bigger challenges. And then right now I try to get into organizational change management, but I keep getting pulled into these wonderful consent order programs. Consent order is when the OCC or the FRB, that's a Federal Reserve Bank, or the Office of Comptroller and Currency, say that you will do with us and so, or we will fine you hundreds of millions of dollars. So I always found that to be a little bit of an oxymoron, because there's not really a whole lot of consent involved. It's you do it or we don't, or we do bad things to you. So who has seen the show Ozark on Netflix? I was like, if you have not, I recommend it. You can binge watch it, and there are some cliffhangers. And well, let me do the next screen. So this is one of the cliffhangers that they went through. If you can see that the two main characters are being hugged by the drug lord, and they're covered with the former attorney's blood. Not to spoil it for you, but a lot of shocking moments in there. But essentially, the story is that he got into money laundering for the cartels, and things got worse and worse and worse for him as time went on. But they do a pretty good job of explaining, at least at a high level, how money is laundered. So they own it. They have a casino boat, and they run money through there. They talk about smurfing, and you'll be introduced to a lot of terms that I probably won't get too deep in today, because I'm gonna keep it at a pretty high level. That, and it's a pretty good series. So anti-money laundering. It includes, but it's not limited to drug smuggling, distribution, sales. And I like to draw out movies that will give you an idea of what that's like. I don't know if you've seen Traffic with Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones. It's all about the drug smuggling. Terra Finance, not a movie reference, but American Airlines was shorted, and whoever shorted them made an estimated $4 million. Arms trade, Nicolas Cage, if you've seen The Lord of War. Interestingly, in the news, the real character that was portrayed in The Lord of War was just released back to the Russians for the basketball player, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head. And if you've seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, his daughter was kidnapped, human trafficking. The estimated amount of money laundered globally is 2 to 5% of the global GDP, and that's between 800 billion and $2 trillion. So we're talking not just chump change. This is the money laundering cycle. You collect money from your illicit industry. You put it in a financial institution of some sort. They try to get them into banks to legitimize the money. They do a lot of transferring, then they transfer it out of that account. And then through a process offshore banking, they reintegrate it into the legitimate money system. They purchase that property, planes, boats, cars, what have you, and then it becomes legitimate. There are some governing authorities, of course, over all of these, the regulations that you have to deal with, getting into the regulatory environment. FinCEN is one of the largest ones, and I won't read this to you except for some of the underlying areas. So FinCEN is responsible for combating money laundering, financing of terrorism, and financial crimes by monitoring banks and other institutions. These are the people who basically are the watchdogs. Another watchdog is OFAC. Their primary control is to control the economic and trade sanctions. So we have trade sanctions against Cuba, Iran, Pakistan, North Korea, Russia, and a handful of other ones, but those are the key ones. And if you do business with any of those countries, you're going to be highly regulated and restricted from doing most of the more lucrative type of businesses. So a lot of companies will try to get around it, get around the sanctions, and OFAC is responsible for tracking those. Counter-finance terror activities, regulations. As you will probably know, there's a lot of regulations. I see Henry smiling, so he's familiar with some of these terms. Banking Secrecy Act and the U.S. Patriot Act. You'll probably be familiar with those, but some of the other ones that are associated with AML. AML is short for anti-money laundering. CFT is I'm drawing a blank. Counterterrorism financing. Money Laundering Control Act of 1986. 1994. Financial Crimes Act of 1998. Suppression of Finance Counterterrorism in 2002. Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention of 2004. And these are just the big ones. These are the ones that are used in the law enforcement over time. And these are all ones that the banks have to be aware of, because in banking, we have to comply with each and every one of these. And the regulations change from time to time. And we have an army of lawyers just to keep track of the nuances. Now, that's all pretty complicated, and you might be thinking to yourself, there's got to be a certification associated with that. As I mentioned, this is the certification. You don't want to take this test twice. Kind of like the PMP, it introduces you to all of the global, regional, and lesser degree financial organizations that monitor and regulate financial transactions globally. And there are at least 3 dozen that you have to become familiar with to be able to pass this test. It's a good cert to have if you want to go to work in banking and work on consent orders. I don't recommend working on consent orders unless you have the patience of Job, because you will be exercising patience with great regularity. So getting into the problem statement. This was 8 years ago when I first started working for Citibank. They said, hey, we have a challenge for you. And I'm a kind of a challenge chaser. I said, oh, I can do this. So the FRB said that Citibank's monitoring for credit cards wasn't up to snuff. Unfortunately for Citibank, they've been telling Citibank this for 10 years. The FRB was losing patience. They don't like to lose their patience because they're the best we could tell from dealing with all the liaisons to the FRB is that we were facing roughly a $600 million fine or more. And the problem with that is real big with banking is reputational risk and reputational damage. You've probably heard in the news of some banks who have been getting into trouble. Maybe Wells Fargo fined $1 billion in 2018. JP Morgan fined $200 million in 2021, all for the use of just one private text app, and not even systemically, one small group of one team in a very small area within JP Morgan. They were still fined $200 million. Citibank was fined $400 million for longstanding internal problems, specifically to deal with project management. Now, coming back as a segue, coming back to Citibank, I didn't believe it, but they actually got worse in project management. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Largest fines to date, at least at the time I would put this deck together. Bank of America, 16.65 billion, JP Morgan, 13 billion, and that was to do with subprime lending practices. You're talking real money at this point. This is the world according to banking. These are the regions which they describe everything: North America, Latin America, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, APAC, Asia Pacific countries. This is how we divide up the world. There are governing bodies for each of these regions, and then each country has its own governing body. Oftentimes you go down into the state level for each of these countries. So there are a lot of regulatory bodies that have a say when you do business. Now, when you're trying to do a global program, you have an army of lawyers to refer to is to say, this is what we want to do. Can we do this? One of the restrictions that we ran into that comes to mind is we were trying to restrict the amount of money you could get from an ATM in Malaysia. And the lawyers came back and said, no, you can't do that. Apparently in Malaysia, you can't put a cap of less than $10,000 to draw from an ATM in Malaysia. Had no clue. So we would run into little things like that. Africa has some interesting rules. Latin America, it's kind of like the Wild West. North America, we're fairly well regulated. Another thing I ran into is Japan and South Korea have some of the strongest privacy laws. We could not do business, period. Or actually, we could not transfer data back and forth with these two countries, period. We had to send teams there to make sure that their systems were doing what we were designing on a global level. So there's 195 countries globally. So we had to deal, and we were doing business in most of them, not all of them. We actually had to withdraw from a couple countries. Venezuela comes to mind, and then another country in South America that I don't recall. So as you can probably tell, since I was responsible for every country, I had a lot of learning to do. And each region has its own flavor to it, way they do business, where their priorities are. And I have not found one that addresses the LATAM portion of it. It's not an oversight. I couldn't find a good description for it, and apologize for that. So that we'll be comparing NAM, EMEA, and APAC. So each area has a different focus. Yeah, North America, we're rugged individualists. Just ask us, we'll tell you, until we go on Survivor, and then we want somebody to deliver some food. EMEA, very socialist, balanced, more humility than we have here. APAC, they're communal, but they're very hierarchical. They're modest, they're safe. Have you ever heard of losing face in Asia Pacific countries? It's very important. If you work in Japan, you use the term san. It's basically saying sir, koshi-san, kumika-san. So you always use the term san, and you learn these things as you go. I knew a bunch of this. I actually lived in Japan as a child, so I had a little bit of a head start. And being in the Navy, I got to travel around, and they say, okay, we're stopping in this country. These are the things you need to be aware of. We're stopping in this country, like, spending the time in Colombo, Sri Lanka, completely different than the Philippines. But you have to take these things into account when you're trying to tell the regional program manager, you need to get these things done. And they go, but wait, I need to confer with my team. So what do you mean you need to confer with your team? You tell them what to do. No, we don't do things that way. Okay, fair enough. This is a quick reference on what their work style is. North America, quick, competitive. Let's get this done. I'm going to try it on my own first. And if I have to, I'll go ahead and reach out to somebody else. EMEA, very methodical, thoughtful. Let me evaluate this. I don't know if you've done work in Europe, but don't expect them to even be there in August because everybody's on vacation. APAC, also very cooperative, and they like to be part of the process as opposed to drive a process. Any questions? I'll go ahead and take a pause because we're going to get into some good stuff here in a minute. Thoughts, questions?
There's actually a few questions that came through a little bit earlier.
Okay.
The first one was from Sean Liu, and it was just, does the advent of cryptocurrency make it harder to track money laundering?
That's going to be its own presentation, which I need to confer with a friend of mine who works at Wells Fargo. No, excuse me, he's at Chase. He lives for this stuff. The answer is yes and no. So they are getting away with it, but because it is blockchain, they're starting to get to the point where they can monitor it, but I can't take a hard stance on any of this. I do know that many countries have started talking about having their own digital currency. Here in the US, they're talking about having a digital dollar. China has played around with that. And who else comes to mind? Those are the ones, and Russia. So those are the big ones that have tried to come up with their own digital currency, and that makes it easier to track money laundering and other illicit activities, but it's also a violation of privacy because they will know how much money you have in your account at any time. So they have to figure out, there's attachment rates to basically buy in, whether or not you're going to do it, whether or not you're going to utilize that currency. So it's a work in progress, but the answer, do they get away with it? Yes. I can't really get too deep into it because my knowledge is not that deep into that set. I'm fascinated by it, but it's just not anything that I've paid attention to.
There was one more question that came through from Stephen Naylor, and it was, who is the recipient of the fines?
Bank. The risk. Oh, who gets the money? Okay, that's an interesting. So if you're fined by the OCC gets the money. And yeah, you can read about the contention about what they do with that money afterwards. There are regulations that they have internally on where the money goes. Sometimes they give it back to consumers, like when Wells Fargo was fined for their practices of opening up accounts. Some of that money was returned back to the account holders. And again, I can't speak too deeply on that, but that would be a topic for another day.
Let's see. And what agency monitors Congress for money laundering?
I see we have an optimist. The agencies that I listed earlier, technically they would be responsible for monitoring everyone. So the OCC, the FRB, and all the applicable three-letter agencies, the FBI, CIA, depending on if it's national or multinational, that type of thing. In an ideal world, that's who would do it. All right.
I think we're caught up.
Okay, I'll go ahead and stop every so often to answer some questions. This is pretty dense, and I tend to talk a little bit quickly, so I find that taking a break every now and then is handy for me. Okay, here's where you should break out your pencils and pens and write this down if you have any interest in understanding, let me go back, understanding the differences in the cultures. Now, this is a company called Hofstede Insights. I didn't find these guys. Actually, I was taking some MBA courses and I found these. I go, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I wish I knew this 2 years ago when I first started my global program. The list that I showed earlier about the differences in the cultures, they're handy, but I found this is very interesting. And since the China, Russia, and the United States are currently in the news, I thought it would be a good, well, they were in the news 4 years ago too, so it has not changed. So, and I get into the definitions here a little bit deeper, but you can see some big differences between the countries. Like China and Russia for power distance is much different than the United States. And you can say, so masculinity, don't take that as masculine and feminine, but you take it as maybe assertiveness, something like that. Let's get into the definitions. I'll give you time to read this. So power distance, basically, how powerful is your hierarchy? How close do you need to be to feel like you are empowered to do something before you have to go to your boss? Some countries, they won't do anything at all until they talk to their boss. Some Indian teams 20 years ago, they were very much like that. And I think it's actually changing a little bit over time, but Hofstede has done the research and they can give you a very good idea, generally speaking, what it's going to be like to deal with teams who are in a given region. Individualism versus collectivism. As I said, the United States, we're very individualistic. We are achievers of our own volition, or at least that's what we like to think. Sometimes we fall down, which is fine. That's how we learn. Those countries that have more collectivism or socialism or what have you, they prefer to work it as part of a team, and they feel tightly knit because of that. Does anybody need a little bit more time to read these? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move through. Going. Okay. Masculine versus femininity. Again, this is not traditionally how you think about things. Masculinity is the side of this dimension as a preference for achievement, heroism, assertiveness. Think your police, your firefighters, your cats, your firefighters, your soldiers, these people, or your Uber businessmen. They want to achieve something, whereas feminine is more nurturing and more group oriented, more people oriented as far as achievement or people. Uncertainty avoidance. This is risk. And interesting story about risk. When I first joined Citibank, we kept saying the same terms, but meant something completely different. When I talked about risk, I was talking about project and program risk. You are facing a risk, you are going to have this problem. And they said, we don't have that risk. I don't know what you are talking about. And I've learned even more because the current consent order I'm dealing with right now is risk oriented, but it was completely different language. And we were talking past each other for about 4 months. We just didn't come to a clue until I finally realized they're talking about monetary risk. They're talking about risk exposure. They're talking about asset risks. They've got too many houses that they have loans out on. They have people with too much credit card debt. They have that. Whereas I'm saying, hey, you're about to crash your entire program. And they go, no, we're not. Right. Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. So uncertainty avoidance, long-term or short-term orientation. So my favorite story, and this is not Citibank, we'll say that it's Dell Computer Company. I was a program manager there, and I had a new boss, and he said, all right, what can you get me this quarter? I got like a really nice PowerPoint. He says, it's not good enough. You need to get me something. I got, you don't have a program for me. What do you want me to do? He said, go find it. I said, okay, fine, fair enough. So he had a 3-month timeline. And the other joke that I can bring up about Dell is the saying there was like, hey, if my boss calls, get their name, because they reorg about every 3 months. So it's probably why Darcy wanted something in 3 months. Indulgence, my favorite thing, or versus restraint. So are you a party animal, or are you very much focused on work? That's a little bit extreme examples, but do you indulge yourself? Do you enjoy the finer things in life? Or are you reserved and focus on maybe your family or something along those lines? Are you disciplined, or do you like to have fun? So these are the different characteristics that they get into the Hofstede paradigm. I found it very interesting because it drills down to the country level, and it will tell you what to focus on, and it will tell you what not to do. You'd have to infer it, but I found it very useful when I got into there and started evaluating some of the countries I had never been to or even thought about going to visit, some of the ones in Africa, but I found it extremely useful. So in keeping with the environment, one of the things that I found that worked very well in building rapport, because I had to deal with program managers in EMEA, in LATAM, and my Spanish is horrible, and Africa, and Malaysia, Hong Kong, and any number of other places. Sometimes the steering committee was in Malaysia, sometimes it was Kuala Lumpur, sometimes it was Hong Kong. All I did was learn the pleasantries. Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, works on both ways. Shukriya is thank you in Hindi. Dobre dzień or dzień dobry, and I used this just yesterday, is hello in, or excuse me, good morning or good afternoon in Polish. And I'm going to butcher this. It's been a long time since I've said that. Dzięki si, and I think that's thank you in Polish. Arigato or domo arigato, Japanese, gracias. No te hablar español por 40 años. Necesito mucho práctica, and that's about all I can say. But it'll show your teams that you're willing to go out and reach them halfway. And I've had a lot of people chuckle at me, and then we got along a lot better. So a little bit of advice on how to deal with global teams. Okay. So now we're going to get into the actual project management side of things. But now that the stage is set and you understand all of the environmental factors, we'll get into the project management side of things. The first thing that I tried to do was determine what level of PMO organization did they have there. If you're familiar with the Gartner Group, they grade the level of maturity for a PMO. And I'm sad to say that the level of PMO at Citi was and still is basically a 1, maybe a 1.5, and in some areas, at least in the compliance area. And what I have come to find out is the reason for this is because they rebuild it every single time for every program. Okay, we're done with that, and they let everybody go. When they let me go from Citibank, they let 10,000 people go. So that was all of their project management and program management and portfolio management expertise. It went out the door. And as you can surmise, when they need it again, they have to build it again. So they have an ungodly amount of consultants, myself being one, until later this month when they're going to convert me. And we have to deal with this. I have currently, so now we're going to talk current situation. I have no less than 6 PMOs that I need to provide status to on a weekly basis. And their tempos are all over the map. Some Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Actually, I think Thursday is free. And then of course, Friday. So, and they all want it now. But my milestone owners and my business owners are going, I don't have time for that. You do it. I'm like, I don't know where you are. One of the other things in the current situation is because of the consent order, because if you remember, they got in trouble for not being proficient in the project management. They've said that all the responsibility lies at the director level. So all of my milestone owners, they're the ones who are responsible for it. So there's an incredible amount of pressure on them. So they're trying to get everything done, but they don't adhere to any of the project management standards. So as you can say, chaos reigns. So, but we tend to do what we can, get the time when we can. I've built rapport because I've made life easier for my stakeholders, not necessarily good, but easier, because I'll take the weight of what they need to do and start doing the planning that they don't have time to do. But that took me 4 months to get to this point. Questions? Doesn't it sound exciting? You want to work here?
So they consistently disassemble all of their different teams after projects finish and then have to completely ramp up and start from scratch every time?
The evidence would suggest that for consent order programs, they do a big divestiture and then have to hire back. And
That's tough. I mean, I used to work in disaster recovery, and I was kind of used to the environment that it was contracts, the ramp up, they may or they may not have the contract. It ends, everybody disperses, then the next disaster happens. That industry, I think, has gotten better perhaps with that, with trying to retain institutional knowledge, but I can see where that impacts processes heavily.
Okay, so let's dive just a little bit deeper into this. Let's look at these bottom 3 bullets on level 1 basic. Analysis is ad hoc, meaning we form a meeting and we have to come with answers to questions that should take 2 or 3 months to answer. Spreadsheets. We do not have what I would consider a project management system. We don't have Microsoft Project. We don't have, and nor enterprise level, nor anything else like that. We were managing it with Jira. which if and I saw the look of pain on your face, and I feel it too on a daily basis, but it's going to get worse. So we were using Jira in a manner that it was not intended to use. It's an agile tool. But now they've moved us over to the system called project tracking system, and it's not. If you look at it, it was probably made in the 1990s and then bastardized since then. But it's a reporting engine, and then we've been told we need to track in that. And I know people who administer at Jira, and they just shake their heads, and I go like, okay, I got it. So not only that, they don't even have the foundational knowledge or tools. So everything is done in individual spreadsheets, excuse me. I just gave out a copy to my team of the latest schedule, and they refuse to call it a schedule. They call it a plan. I was like, this is not a plan, but it's a plan. No, it's not a plan. So that's the environment. They've got a lot of great people who mean really, really well, but we're really hobbled by the organization. It's hierarchical. Part of the reason that we have churn is because an executive somewhere will say, I want to see thus and so. So everybody will break their backs trying to get data and provide it to the executive. A, it's going to be wrong. B, it's going to be dated, and it takes away time from actually getting the work done. I think there are probably 6 people looking at your work or asking you for status for every 4 people that are doing work. So who wants to work in compliance? Okay, moving on. Now we're getting to the problem statement, what we actually had to deal with. Again, it had to do with credit card transaction monitoring for anti-money laundering. So on any given day in Citibank, they do $4 to $5 trillion worth of transactions. Now you could, I hadn't done the math. I thought about doing it. It's like, say, if you average it out to $10,000 for every transaction, which is unrealistic, and then you had to monitor that, it's an ungodly amount of number. I'll have to do the math because now I'm curious. Scope, as I said, North America, LATAM, APAC, EMEA, Japan, South Korea, Mexico. Mexico is its own special, interesting problem. So we had 142 countries. Like I said, several fell out over time, such as Venezuela, because we divested completely because, currency devaluation, corruption, all that fun stuff. I described the organization, its compliance, its regulatory, its AML tech. These are all business units. Global Cards Business, Global Card Tech, the business tech, and FIU. FIU is an interesting group. That's the people who can investigate you from the banking side. If they find reason to continue the investigation, then they hand it over to the feds. So they're always a fun bunch. I thought I moved on. Oh, then multiply that across 4 regions and several standalone countries. And that's not even a complete list of each of the verticals that I had to work with. Resources. I had a team of project managers in each region with varying degrees of competency. Most of them are pretty good, and a lot of them like to just push paper. Thousands of project participants globally. I even had all of the big five consulting companies in, and I actually got to fire one because they were just sitting there doing nothing for 6 months. And they weren't going to be doing anything for another 6 months. I don't think they like that. Gantt chart. Okay, I did have Microsoft project, but it was a standalone. Instance, and I couldn't share it with anyone because of data concerns. I couldn't send it to APAC and EMEA. So imagine trying to synchronize these project schedules across regions and then disseminate that information to each of the countries. You can say mini nightmare. So each country had to maintain its program schedule, and we had to do that synchronization. Each technology group and many business units had their own schedules and didn't share. So yeah, it was a wonderful environment to work in. Steering committees. Oh, I love their steering committees.
I was going to ask if you had the challenge of like licensing, like if y'all were using certain things to manage schedules and a certain group maybe didn't have the licenses for Microsoft Project or whatever tool was being used. Was that something contributing to inconsistency too?
No, I don't think it was that, because just about anybody with a justification could get Microsoft Project. Like I have it on my system, but nobody else uses it. So there's no purpose for me to put it into the schedule because they're so Excel centric. It's just, it would be a monumental waste of my time. It would look good, great for a week, and then it would be out of date because nobody's going to use it. I told my boss when the head of the PMO, when I was there, I said, give me $10 million and I'll get Microsoft Project Enterprise. He says, they'll never approve that. I said, all right, then update SharePoint. That way I could actually integrate it with SharePoint because there's a module that allows it to integrate and you can have people integrate with that plan. He says, no, they'll never do it. I got, okay, it's going to take longer. I don't know if I call this out specifically later on in the presentation, but when I first arrived there, I get this handoff for this Gantt chart, this Microsoft project schedule, and I'm trying to make heads or tails of it. And I have a meeting up in New York with all the people who are supposed to be involved, and they keep saying, where in your schedule is this? I said, it's not my schedule, this is your schedule. Apparently one group had been rogue for a long time and they didn't even know that they were part of a bigger program. That when I finally got my hands around it, they said that we only had a year to go. I says, no, you have 4 more years to go. And I didn't realize it, but I was being optimistic at the time just because I didn't know the full scope of what I was dealing with. So they did not like that. Here we go. Language and terminology differences between project management and banking. They call their schedule a plan. It's not. Quality means something completely different to them. Cost. So cost was interesting. When I was in that first 3-month period, I asked, how do I track costs? And they said, you don't. I go like, are you kidding me? Seriously. And they said, no, we'll take care of that. I go like, I don't think you're going to. So interestingly, there's an interesting relationship between compliance and the business. Compliance doesn't tell them how much it's going to cost, and business doesn't ask because it's a compliance engagement. And I did get to, and how I came up with the fact that it was $1 billion program, or at least as close as I could get to, was I figured out the burn rate for all the subject matter experts that I had, and all the people who were billing to the program, because I did sneak a peek a couple of times at the different regions because I built a rapport to be able to do that. And the burn rate was just astronomical. I could not believe it. And then, like I said, over 4 years, we burned through about $1 billion. We didn't have to, but that's just the way the bank works. Cost, they didn't care. Scope, what is scope? I don't think they understand what scope is because they spend so little time planning that they don't understand all the things that are required, like technology side. They didn't really understand what the environmental costs. They didn't understand the hardware costs. They didn't understand the setup costs. They didn't understand this. And we hit it with our forehead every single time. So again, good times. Language different, keeping with banking risks. They have a different, their risk categories are these, credit risk, market risk, operational liquidity, business risk, systemic risk, moral hazard. And believe it or not, they spend a lot of time on avoiding moral hazards, which leads to reputational risk and reputational damage. They're very keen to keep their reputations as high and unblemished as possible, all other things withstanding. Governance, continuing. So internal audit reviews, I had, of course, more than one group demanding that I deal with internal audit. Business had their own set, information technology had their own set, compliance and PMOs. And there was an inconsistency across the board understanding what the project is. Like, what's it, Raghu? Raghu was a director in AML technology. And I was on this call, so I laughed out loud. It was good. I was glad that I was on mute at the time. Internal audit says, how do we know the coders actually coded the code that they said that they coded? And Raghu said, if you want, I can have everybody wear a GoPro and record every bit of code that they write. And internal audit actually thought that might not be a bad idea. And that's when I started laughing uncontrollably. So anyway, and this is why I thought this would be a good subject to talk on. Federal Reserve Bank submission. So after we wrap all of this information up, then we send it off to the FRB. And the FRB comes back with better questions than internal audit has. But they say, like, how do you know that you've addressed all the risks that exist? And you're like, well, how do you prove that you've addressed all the risks that exist? How do you know? What about the known? You got your known knowns, you got your known unknowns, and you got, and just to, channel Cheney here for a minute, you got your unknown knowns and your unknown unknowns. And like so they ask interesting questions. So the benefit was that we avoided the $600 million fine, maintained our reputation, but the duration before and after I came in was 6 years plus. So some of the systems that we put into place was, this was their first big Hadoop data system to put in all the transactions, to monitor all the transactions worldwide. We put in adaptable heuristics for above the line and below the line detection, because if there's too many, you don't want too many false positives, then you have far too many investigations going on with those wonderful folks at the FIU. But if you don't have enough, then they're going to question you, are you actually monitoring effectively? In the end, we were successful. I guess, so this was the first and only project that I ever tried to kill, because it was, in my mind, was such a mess. And then that's when I learned that an FRB consent order, you cannot tell the FRB no, period. I mean, you've said no a whole bunch of times to get to the point where there's a consent order. So there's no saying no. Were we successful? It really depends on how you define success. We finished it. Was it over cost? Kind of hard to say. They didn't set a budget. Couldn't tell you. Scope wasn't even set at the start. Had no idea. So by what metric do I say that this was a success? I didn't die. We did complete it, and the FRB did not fine us $600 million. So that's the measure of success. Any questions? Because I have some bonus material.
There was one that came through from Shala.
Okay.
So you had mentioned that you were a contractor and you're about soon to be converted to a permanent employee. So
Currently,
during the
yes.
6+ years, were you, I come from banking, I spent 20+ years in banking.
Okay.
So during these 6 years, were you a contractor?
No, I was a full-time employee. And
Okay,
I was an employee for 4 years of that time, of the 6 years that it was ongoing, because at first it was managed, I think, by EY, and then by Deloitte, and then by nobody. And then Deloitte did the handoff to me over the course of 3 months.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's when I took over for the final 4 years. It was supposed to be the final year, but that didn't work out.
And the reason for everybody else on the call that I ask is in banking, they get very concerned when you have a contractor with a engagement greater than 2 years, because then they will feel that you are considered an employee, you become a risk, and then it falls into you're a contractor acting as an employee, and therefore it causes issues. So they tend to give you a break before your 2 years come up.
Yeah, so I'm coming up on, I think the 18th of this month will be my 6 months. And that's why they're very interested in converting me. In fact, I told them I was willing to go the full year, and I think it's down to a year that they won't go beyond for exactly that reason. But they said, no, they want to convert me now because, well, the pay differential is substantial.
Yeah. I have one other question for you, Jerry. I love that information that you shared and that website that you shared, Hofstede, on cultural differences. And having transitioned from banking into healthcare, I can truly see the difference of masculine versus feminine, right?
Yes.
I consider banking very masculine and healthcare very feminine. And it's definitely a transition when you move into that world, because you come in with your masculine mindset from banking and you walk into a healthcare environment, and that doesn't really go over well sometimes, right? So are you aware of any similar tool or resource that would be able to do that across industries as opposed to across countries and cultures?
The first one that comes to mind So I made a transition from hardware to software, and I knew none of the acronyms, and my team figured that out pretty fast. So I actually found a website called Acronym Finder. And when they throw out an acronym, I go, all right, fine. And I get on my laptop in the middle of the meeting and type in their acronym, the 3 or 4 or 5 letter acronym, and then come up with a list. And, it helped quite a bit. It solved a lot of my confusion because, hardware and software are 2 different worlds. Software development, they have their own language about how things done, and it's a lot softer. It's more about process, and hardware is pretty defined. There are certain things that you do have to figure out, but by and large, the solutions are either known or close to known. So Acronym Finder is the first one that I thought of, and it's across all industries. I used it when I was working for the DoD as well. I don't know, I don't know of anything that would help with the transition because I worked in healthcare as well, and state government. But I think once you master the acronyms, and then you have at least a nose for the culture, I think that'll get you where you need to be. I'm sure you are already, but that's one of the tools I've used in the past. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
And Jerry, I have to agree with you there. When I worked for the Department of Defense, I became married to the Acronym Finder because they had acronyms within their acronyms.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, and the same acronym maybe had 3 different meanings. So yeah, depending on what branch of government, a service or who you were talking to. So yeah, I definitely keep Acronym Finder in my favorites at all time.
It's handy. All right, and then even if it's not an acronym, so my lieutenant colonel came up to me and says, "All right, I need you to put steel on target." I go, "What do you mean steel on target?" Basically, you meant achieve the objective. So there are other things that are not going to be acronyms that you just have to figure out as you go. Any other questions? This is a great conversation, and hopefully I didn't go too quickly. I like the interaction. All right, on to. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I have a question. Like, how did you, because a lot of the systems weren't in place.
Right.
How did you kind of resist the urge to push, to work within the system you had and not to try to recreate? Let me say that.
Maybe I didn't, and maybe I got in trouble for pointing out the glaringly obvious, and then I learned my lesson, and then I just learned to navigate and build the rapport with the teams that I needed things from. I did try to change the system. I tried to be an agent of change, and it didn't go well. One of the things about banking is they're extremely hierarchical. I would say stronger than the military. In the military, you can at least talk to somebody who's above you in rank. But in banking, the amount of credence you get is based on where you are in the hierarchy structure. And that was a disadvantage. And I didn't realize it when I first went into the banking side of things, because I was a director of PMO at Transamerica. So I was running, the entire budget for their technology business, PMO. I had 40 people who worked in the PMO and people who were working elsewhere, teams in the Philippines, Malaysia, et cetera. And then I had this opportunity to go work at Citibank, and they made me a vice president. And I'm thinking in my head, director, vice president. But in banking, it's reversed. So VPs are below directors and then managing directors. So as a VP, I had almost zero pull. So all I had going for me was my ability to build rapport and influence people and try to convince them that to follow the process or to even participate was in their best interest. I had to deal with a managing director, which is just under the C level. And I'm several, so there's managing director, SVP and VP. So I'm 4 levels below this guy, but I'm responsible for doing all this. And he said, I have no interest in doing this, not going to do it. But I found out that he's building a new oceanfront property in Florida. So, that, you might not get your bonus if we get, tagged with this, fine from the FRB. It says, well, I'm not part of that. It says, well, no, they'll make sure to share the wealth and you won't get a bonus. Then I finally got some compliance. So I just suggested it. Of course, I can't say for sure. So you just point out the possible downsides to their actions. And sometimes it works. A lot of times it didn't. So it was more about diplomacy than anything else. And probably it is the most political environment that I've ever worked, even more than the DoD. Did I answer the question, I guess? Is that right?
No, you did. You did. Thank you.
You bet. Anybody else? So, all right, I actually have a couple slides of bonus material. So somebody had asked about cryptocurrency. So let me introduce you to this couple. Now, again, this is a while back when I created this. This couple was arrested for laundering $4.5 billion in cryptocurrency. So is it easy? Yeah, apparently. Do they get caught? They do, but not all the time. Has anybody had a project that failed? Anybody feel like the guy on the right? Yeah, that's what I felt like at Citi. So is anybody familiar with the Standish Group? The Standish Group tracks project failures. And I'll send this presentation to Tanya, and she can distribute it if you're interested in the links. 70% of all projects, period, across the board, fail by at least one metric. Many more than that. Companies don't understand the need for the project management. Project managers go like, okay, we're going to go overrun. Oftentimes, we know this is going to happen before it's going to happen. I actually had, and this was recently. This is 2-3 months ago. I had a manager tell me when I raised a risk, I says, you're going to have a problem with this area and it's going to delay us by X amount. And he says, how can you know that? And I said, this is what I do. And then 3 months later, it happened and we're running into hiring problems. And he said, why didn't you tell me? I said, I did 3 months ago. And I said, oh, okay. So managers don't always know what we can do as project managers. So, and it's a tough sell in the wrong environment. Now this is worst case scenario. So I have worked for some fantastic places. So this just happens to be the biggest program I've ever run in one of the most chaotic environments I've ever been in. So some other bonus material. Not to get into what this slide says in particular, I'm a fan of two people. If you're familiar with J. Edwards Deming and his peer Harrington, I forget the guy's first name. They both talked about quality. There's a formula that they talk about is if you focus on quality, your costs will go down over time, and your quality goes up over time. Harrington took it from the other side. He says if you don't focus on quality, here is how much you are losing in your organization. And he actually did this with IBM. IBM did a turnaround, but this is dating back to the 70s. But these are the two guys that I enjoy their approach and try to emulate, but I find the traction is not where I would like it to be. They don't want to hear it unless it can do something for them in, say, 3 months. So again, the short-sighted managers, they don't seem to understand that. And then we can get into the finite and the infinite game, but I think I'm actually done. So any last questions? And then I'll turn it back over to Tanya.
Let's see, from Susan Adam, in my experience, many large companies sacrifice quality because budget must be met and scheduled. Yes.
Yeah. That's a difference between a finite and an infinite player.
And then Dean Mallory, Deming talks about scrapping toast. If you're adding process at the end to fix the problems produced by the process instead of fixing the process itself, then you are scrapping toast. Interesting analogy.
So what I say is that the process is the punishment. So that's my colloquialism for that right now.
Okay.
It's not trademarked. You can keep it, if you like it. And I see the term wagile on the PMP is on the PMP heavily. I think a lot of programs end up being wagile, or I think the term that more closely relates to is iterative. They plan, they go for 3 months maybe, and they go like, oh man, we got to regroup. So it's an unofficial agile approach. It's more iterative because they tend to panic. But I think the way to get through most of these things and is just be aware, aware that this is the environment you're in. This is the level of maturity for the PMO. These are the personalities you're dealing with. I didn't get into it with this presentation, is I try to grade the personalities of all of my milestone owners or all of my stakeholders, whether it's the steering committee or the people who are actually responsible for the work. And over time, it gets pretty easy. It's like, oh yeah, he's a green. Oh, he's a red. Oh, he's that. When you use the different personality indexes with the 4 colors, and then that'll give you a top level assessment of where they are and how they'll respond and how you need to communicate with them.
So you make those assessments yourself on those personality profiles. Have you ever gotten any of the stakeholders to agree to taking personality assessments?
I've never asked.
It's kind of cool. We did that at Revenue in 2016. We kind of self-assessed, and I know Shaila's told me that she's done that at her organization too. It's probably easier to get buy-in from smaller groups than larger groups, because even in my group, there were some that are like, I don't want to do this. I don't have to do that. You can't make me do it, and
now, if you're lucky,
interesting results.
Yeah, if you're lucky, you'll run into somebody who's done it, and they're more than willing to share, because they want to say, all right, hey, this is how you communicate with me. Be brief, be bright, be gone. Or I want to know the story, or let's connect and work on these things. So some of the better ones will know these things. But if you're in a company, and I think Citibank is roughly 400,000 people, and they're trying to manage across all the continents, all the 142 countries, what have you, whatever the number is these days. And it's difficult. And it is as close to Game of Thrones that I have ever experienced. Although these days, I think the new Jane Fraser, the new CEO, is actually making progress on doing culture change, but there's a long way to go. Nobody's getting their head chopped off yet.
Well, especially if they disassemble teams a lot too, because it's just starting all over. I mean, it's easier to figure out how to retain your employees than it is to retrain the whole brand new group. That's tough.
For instance, I was less than a month in on this current effort, and all the second line people went to the first line, and nobody was doing the second line. So there was an entire section of work that had nobody to do it. So they threw somebody at it, and she's getting ready to retire. So there's a risk, or actually it's not even a risk, it's an issue, it's a certainty. And then the new guy that they threw in right after her is up to here with work, and he's struggling. That's the guy I've been trying to field all of his work as much as I can and building the rapport that way. Plus he's in Seattle and I used to live there, so that doesn't work. That doesn't hurt. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, observations? Did you enjoy yourself?
Yes. So
I'm far too serious, I know.
Yeah.
Or sarcastic, one of those two.
Just a few things kind of from the PMI formalities side of the house. I'm going to put the claim code in the chat as well, but I'm also going to read it out. So for those of you that are current members of the Baton Rouge chapter, just know that these will be posted on your behalf within 3 to 5 business days, depending upon how quickly we can get to it. And the code, for those of you that are writing it down, and like I said, I'll put it in the chat, is C106 9A 438A. So let me go ahead and type that in the chat right quick. And on these recordings too, we typically record the meetings and we get them on our website, usually the next day or a day and a half afterwards. And so like Jerry mentioned, he'll be going ahead and sending me the PowerPoint presentation. So once we've got that, what we'll do is we'll post on our website as well, because I know y'all already get a whole lot of communications on emails from me. So that'll save y'all from an email. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Like I said, keep checking the page. But on LinkedIn, we tend to communicate a whole lot within our Baton Rouge PMI group. And I communicate a lot of that on my personal LinkedIn as well, because we've all got different connections and different networks. So I'm a big proponent of sharing because we've all got different friends. And the more we talk about the different ways that helps us in our jobs, the more people hear that, the more energy we gain, the more people get trained on it and can think of different ways of working that might help one another. So that's a lot, and just other very brief announcements. So another PDU earning opportunity is going to be this Thursday in Baton Rouge at the Advocate. That's going to be a new venue for us. I'll actually be doing the presentation, calling it Chat in the Hat, where I'm doing a live demonstration of something that's called Devano's 6 Thinking Hats. We're going to be talking specifically, like, not the problem statement, but the idea that I'm kind of wanting to brainstorm with those that are able to join us is different ways that we can amp up the energy for our in-person meetings and learn to connect that back. So there's a lot of you that have currently signed up. Looking forward to meeting some of you in person too. And like I said, that's going to be another opportunity to get the PDUs. Emily, are you still on the line? Because if you are, I would love to hear more about the volunteer opportunity in February. Or have you shared that?
Hey, thanks, Tanya. Yeah, we've got our first volunteer day. PMI Baton Rouge will be spending a few hours on Saturday, February the 4th at the Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank. It is a sorting shift, so there'll be all kinds of different roles for folks who have restrictions or want to sit down or whatever you might want to do. We have a pretty small team. There's, I think, 4-ish spots left on the team. So if you'd like to volunteer with us, give me a shout out in the chat or with your email, and I can reach out to you, or you can reach me at the membership email. I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat in case anybody's interested in joining us that day.
Right. So, and that's something too. We're going to be brainstorming this weekend as a board on just 3 more opportunities that we can do give backs to the community. So we definitely invite y'all to stay connected because it's going to be different ways to earn the PDUs, get to know one another better, and learn from each other in our industries. So thank you. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us and sharing with us. And a shout out to Jerry's group too. The PMI Dallas chapter is the other chapter that I belong to. I mean, sometimes it's hard to maintain different memberships and be on the board and run it too, but I did wind up joining the Jowlers chapter to get some of the discounts for the virtual events that they offer to, and just share synergy. And his group does an amazing job. And I love seeing other PMI leaders on here too. I mean, Russell, I haven't had the opportunity to join y'all's sessions just yet, but I appreciate you joining us. And hopefully I'll have that chance this year to kind of pop in on different PMI chapters and learn from everybody else too. So this is going to be a great year. All right, we got a few more. Did anybody have any other questions?
Tanya, are there any plans to have any events in the Lafayette area this year?
I need to figure that out. We can do that. What we kind of transparently, what we ran into last year, we were able to have 9. I think we had 9 speakers. I think we either had like 4 in Baton Rouge, maybe, and then 5 in Lafayette. Most of our membership is in Baton Rouge, so I know we need to focus getting that on a more consistent schedule again. But Lafayette, I think there is still a lot of interest in that. The backstory on that, we had kind of started a venue there. I think it was in either 2017 or 2018. And then when COVID hit, we wound up shifting a lot of the speakers that we had planned for that to what became our virtual. So yes, we can talk about that. It may be more of the second quarter. And the only reason I say that is just kind of capacity training. We've got 2 new members on the board this year, with Shyla stepping in for professional development and Corey stepping in for finance. But once we get some of the other schedules ironed out, we'll open up those opportunities. And that's something too, if you being in the local area, if there's people that are, because I live in Lafayette too. So if there's people for me to go meet up with at the coffee shop too and help coordinate and explain some different things and build the energy, then I'm more than willing to do that. So
awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Diacu, is that correct?
I don't know. Which one is that?
There we go. So I took a stab at the pronunciation for thank you in Ukrainian.
Oh.
Glad I put that out there. Yeah, it takes some practice. That's going to take some practice. It's a whole new, I'm much better with Russian. Здравствуйте, как дела? Я не говорю по-русски немного.
Ooh, final thing I wanted to ask before we close, Jerry, since you're going through the globalization and just different things that you've learned from a global team, how would you amp up people for global PMI? And what have you learned in being a chapter leader and having the opportunity to connect with people on a global level with PMI? What has that taught you?
So I would amp up the networking side of things from the global perspective, formally, because we do a lot of networking individually. We go to the events and we go to the summits and that type of thing. We get to meet a lot of great people, but there's not a lot of I think mentoring and networking at the global level, because I always grab the brass ring for whatever opportunity scared me, and that's how I ended up getting into some of the messes I've gotten into and dealing with some of the really big programs. If I wish I'd known 20 years ago what I know now, and the only way I can do that is by somebody who's further up on the experience chain than I am. So that's what gets me motivated, and that's why I say wisdom not shared is wisdom wasted, because I'm not going to live forever. I need to pass it on to somebody, because it's multiplicative. It's not just additional, it's multiplicative. I share it with I maintain a certain number of people that I mentor, and I only have so much time in the day, but I try to instill in them what I've learned and give them the boost up that they need for their careers. And that's what I would love to see from PMI on an official basis.
I agree. I love the organization just because of the opportunity that it gives you to connect with so many different people. And as bad as the pandemic was, the good side, I don't know that we would be here in this virtual meeting had the pandemic not happened, because I don't know that we would have taken those steps to try our hand at pivoting the way that we did. So there's been a lot of growth over the past couple of years, even kind of from the chaos and the fire of it all. And just even realizing this year, that it's important not only to get back to in person, but to keep these up too, because they're easier for people to attend. We can reach a wider audience. We can get a more diverse speaker base. And I think it just helps us all collectively learn. So anyway, well, I appreciate y'all's time tonight, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you again, Jerry. So
My pleasure.
all right. Y'all have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.